here. So I'll do that. And then I'll highlight me, I think, if I can, spotlight, so you guys can see what's going on. So what we're going to tie today is variations of this guy, which is the Mickey fin. And I think I tied it for you guys once before, so I'm just going to do the same thing, but in a different color palette. So the one I'm going to tie is for you guys is this guy here, which has got a white underbottom and a black stripe and a chartreuse top. The techniques are the same regardless of the color. So I start off by using white thread, and this is actually an 8/0, which you could do it with 6/0. And I'm just using white because when you'll see when I start tying in some bits of hair, it makes it a little nicer looking. So I start it and I wind the thread back a good 2 eye widths back from the eye of the hook. And the first thing I want to tie in is the rib. And the rib is this French oval tinsel. And I just take a couple of wraps off the spool. And the spool is a bit of a pain in the butt to get it reattached. And cut it off. Now I'm going to tie this in right close to the eye, well, where the thread was. And I'm going to tie it right on top. So I'm going to hold the tinsel up. Oh, that didn't work very well. Better try again here.
You making these for salt water, Dave? You're using the stainless steel hook?
Yep. Yeah, the hook is Mustad O'Shaughnessy. It's not stainless, but it's a plated hook, so it will put up with the salt water. So I'm going to hold this up and wrap down, trying to keep the tinsel right on top of the hook. And I'm going to wrap it right back down to where the barb was. I already have pinched the barb down. So just a hair past the bend. That's where I'm going to leave it. And bring my thread forward again to where I tied the tinsel in. And I've got this is uni mylar, which means it's a mylar tinsel, and it's gold on one side and silver on the other. And it comes in this particular product, comes in different sizes. This is a number 12, which is sort of a medium wide. And again, a couple of good wraps off the spool. If I can get that to go back in the little slot. These particular spools, the little slot where you store the tinsel is not the nicest, but if you get it there, it's nice. You can trap it. Now, in order to get the silver side out, I want to tie this so that it's got gold on one side and silver on the other. So I want the silver side out for this particular pattern. And I'm going to tie it so that the gold side faces me when I set it up on the hook shank. And with a slight wrap, a loose wrap over top, it will, first I got to take the twist out of my thread. So I just spun my bobbin counterclockwise so that when I make that soft wrap, the loop falls towards the back of the hook rather than the front. And now I've got the gold side tied on top of the hook, sort of facing me. I'm going to get my thread up to the eye, right out of the way. I'm going to take this and make the first wrap around the shank. And when I do that, the tinsel flops over, so the gold is on the inside now, and the silver is on the outside. Get my hackle pliers, and I wrap this to the back. And the trick with this is to try and keep the angle that the tinsel makes with the hook, approximately the same. And that way it walks back down the shank of the hook in touching turns. Now, of course, you got to do a little wiggle around the point as you get to the rear of the hook. But I'm still trying to keep those wraps one next to the other, pretty much touching. It's missed one there, but it's okay. It'll get covered up. If you make it too sharp an angle, then you end up with gaps in the tinsel. And then when I go forward, this is a little easier because I no longer have to dodge the point of the hook. I'm not going to make this all the way back up. That one I missed. I'm just going to adjust it. There we go.
So Florin, have you figured out a spool for tinsel?
Florin has, but I haven't done them. And certainly Florin's technique with the tinsel would work much better than what I'm doing. Now, if you had a rotary hook that vise, this makes it a lot easier, as Florin said earlier. You just have to hold the tinsel at the right angle and rotate the hook, and it makes a big difference. Now, when I get up to this point, I'm going to bring my thread back and wrap on top. Get 2 or 3 good wraps there. And normally when I tie material off, I pull back and wrap in front. If you do that with tinsel, you're going to end up with a little bump. So I'm going to trim this off with just a teeny bit of a tag showing. I'll use my finger to push that tag down flat and wrap it down. Now the rib, I'm going to wrap in the same direction. And I don't need a whole lot of material here for the rib because I'm only going to make 6 or 7 wraps up the hook. So this again is easier because you can keep that angle without worrying about the hook point and get nice even wraps up the shank of the hook. And all that does is just give a little bit of a profile to the body and a little shine, additional glint or shine. Again, wrap off on the top a couple of times over top so it's parallel to the hook shank. And once again, I'm going to hold it straight up and trim it with just a little tag. Use my finger to push the tag down and tie the tag in. Now that's the actual easy part. I want a good almost 4 eye widths behind the eye of the hook. Well, two full, maybe 3 eye widths behind the eye of the hook. I'm going to leave my thread there. Now, you can buy bucktail and the full tail, but they're like $12 for the full tail. These guys are like $3 each. And they come with 2 of these little bits of bucktail. And Robinson's has a pretty good inventory of them. So I'm going to tie the white, and these are really long, but I'm going to try and stroke them off from the pelt so that the tips are somewhat even before I cut it off. And I'm going to take, I'd say, if you scrunch it down, a little less than a gap. If I really scrunch it down, it'll be half a gap width. I'll cut it off close to the hide, so it's fairly long. I hold it by the tips, and I'm going to get all the fuzz out of the bottom. Just stroke it out. There's long tips and short tips. So with this particular tail, I hold this thing down near the end and not really tight. Grab the long tips with my left hand and gently pull them out And then I line all those tips up with the short tips and scrunch them back together. So now I've got more tips that are relatively even. A couple of long, really long ones here I want to get out of the way. Now, this is such a long one that my hair stacker is not going to work too good unless I shorten them up first. So I shorten them up by taking the last little bit off, so they'll fit almost completely in the hair stacker.
Did you use a razor blade or scissors there?
Scissors. I just get the hair into the hair stacker and sort of tap it down a little bit. And I whack it, a good dozen times. There's a few the really short hairs that pop out when you do that. So I end up with and I'll show you my wife's made me a little wastebasket that hangs off my vise. I'll show you that later. Now I want to measure, so the tips are pretty much even. I don't have any really long ones. I measure this up against, and you'll see the bulk of hair has thinned out quite a bit. So now it's maybe 3 times the shank diameter. I'm going to measure this probably just a little bit past the bend. I grab the hair with my left hand right where the thread is hanging, and I'm going to cut it off shy of the eye. So I'm going to make that a little, and when I cut this, I'm going to cut it so that I'm going to have an angle, the scissors angled so that the bottom of the hair is a little longer than the top. Not much, but you can see there's a bit of an angle there. I'm going to cut that off. Cutting that over my waste bin so it's not on my carpet. And the reason I've done that is that when I set this down on the hook shank, I'm going to set it down at an angle like I would with a Klauser minnow, about a 40-degree angle. Put my index finger on the far side of the hook to keep this hair bunch from rolling around the hook. I have to spin the bobbin again. This thread tends to unravel a bit. And I'm going to do a little pinch wrap so that it pulls down onto the shank. And you'll see that the end of the hair is just shy of the eye. I don't want this wound too far forward because I need room up here for the next couple of batches of hair. I'll hold the tail up and make 2 or 3 wraps in behind, and then another one in front, and then a couple of wraps up tight underneath the hair, and then another wrap in front. And what that does is that causes the hair to stick up at a bit of an angle because you put the wraps in behind. It got a big bump at the front there. I didn't cut that hair quite as well. So I'm going to smooth out the bump at the front a little bit before I tie the next batch of hair in. This is why I'm using 8/0. Lots of wraps of thread can build a little bulk without it being too bulky. I'm going to leave my thread just a teeny bit in front of where I tied the last batch of hair in. And I get my black one. And I'll do the same thing. I'll pull this out to the side. About the same, maybe a little less quantity of hair than the white. So it's pull it straight out. See, the tips are relatively even. Cut it off right tight to the leather. Do the same thing, hold on to the tips and fluff out the fuzz at the bottom. And just take this, a dozen or so really long hairs, stroke them out and line the tips up. You see there's a few that ended up being quite long. I'll put it in the hair stacker as I did the last one. And Up and down. Now that's a little bold, so I'm going to take a few strands out to thin out the patch a bit, maybe a little less. That's okay. Not a long one there. Measure the same width of the tips, line them up at a bit of an angle so they're not straight up, they're coming forward a bit. Grab it right at the thread again. And cut off the butts at that same angle where it's not quite square, it's just a little bit shorter at the top than at the bottom. And this might show up a little better when I put it on. So when I set it down on the hook shank, you'll see that the tips are almost at the eye of the hook on this one, a little bit shy of the eye. Make that first wrap and then wrap forward and tighten them down on the eye. Well, there's a few bits here that are a little bit too awkward. There we go. The idea is try not to make too big a head here. Well, I still have those black ones in my fingers. I'm going to lift them up and do the same thing. I'm going to come in behind and snug it down a couple of times and one in front. So now you see we've got a good separation between the white and the black. Now the chartreuse. So it's basically repeating this process. I'm going to have a little bigger batch of chartreuse because I want that to be the predominant color. Pull it out at right angles and kind of stretch them out. So that now this particular batch of chartreuse has got a little more even tips, so it's going to be a little easier to manage. Get the fuzz out. This is particularly important if you want to use deer hair instead of bucktail, or I should say polar bear instead of bucktail. You got to get that fuzz out or it'll never stack. And I'm going to trim the long butts off again so I can stack it without the hair sticking way up in the air. So again, the hair goes into the... Sometimes if you blow on your stacker when you're trying to put it in the hair in tip first, blowing on it will cause those long hairs to go into the stacker. Every time you stack, there's a few loose hairs that come out. That's just why you end up with less bulk by the time you finish stacking. And line these up, same sort of thing, trying to keep that sort of almost a fan shape. And put my fingers right where that thread is hanging. And once again, cut the hair almost square this time because I'm a little tighter to the eye and I don't want the butt ends to overlap the eye. Set that down. Again, pinch it so that that green doesn't wrap around the hook when I make that first wrap. Cinch it down good and wrap the hair down to the eye. So now I built a nice, I don't need to go in behind this one because I want it to sort of cover over the black a little bit. And I'm going to make a nice smooth eye here, or head here. Lots of thread wraps with this 8/0. Cover up all the green. Okay, make sure my eye is clear of thread. Crowded this one just a hair. Whip finisher. I'm gonna do 4 wraps twice. It's not that good. I have the joy of teaching Dante how to use a whip finisher by Zoom. That's going to be fun next week. Get her on there, good and snug. Trim the thread. Now, the last thing I'm going to do is I have a marker. I'm going to mark this, the white thread black, because these things, I think they look better with a black head. Now you could use, you could use a Sharpie for this, probably better than this, because this is takes a little while to dry.
Dave, there's a study was done in Sebago Lake that said the smelt-like flies that had eyes outcaught the non-eyed flies 3-1.
Well, that would be interesting. You could probably do that. You could probably put a nice eye on here in yellow or something before you took the black marker out.
Well, you could
And
use
color.
one of those stick-on and glue-it on.
Yeah, you could do that. Then you'd probably have to put epoxy or something on there.
Yeah,
to hold
put
it.
some epoxy on the top of it.
Now, the nice thing about these particular markers, and they're a Letraset product, and they used to carry them at the art shop that's down on Store. But I was in there with my wife the other day, and I didn't see them. They've got a different and very expensive version of these Letraset markers. You might still be able to get these at Island Blue. It's a Letraset product. It's got a big thick nib at the bottom end, and it's got 2 different sizes of nib at the other end. I'm going to use the medium-sized nib here. So I want to be able to get close to the hair without coloring the hair. And so if I hold my left hand up against the vise to support the marker, I can get into cover up all of the white without getting the hair done. Now I'll let this dry out pretty good before I put the head cement on, because otherwise it'll bleed into the head cement, and the end of your brush on the head cement turns
You use
black.
black head cement.
You could do that. Yes, that would work too. So there he is. And the trick is taking your time with getting the hair prepped for stacking and getting the stacking done nice, and starting at this point back here, which is, a good 3 eye widths behind, and then gradually moving forward with each successive batch of hair so that the head ends up being tapered rather than a great big lump. And I had a minor tragedy this week. It's funny. I've had this really nice little bodkin for decades. And yesterday, the needle on my old bodkin broke right at the bottom here where the brass comes on. And I don't know where you can get another one. I happen to have another bodkin like this that has the big fat end. But I like the little one because it had a tapered end with a hole in it that I could use as a 1/2-inch tool. But it's done. I had to pitch it. I couldn't even drill the old needle out. Oh well. The good side of this week was that my wife made me this really nice little waist bag, and it's got a wire in it. So all I do is hook the wire under the corner of the vise, and I can shovel my stuff in the waist bag without it ending up on the carpet. So I'm pleased with that. And that's it. Now, like I say, you can play around. There's so many of these little, for $3 for 2 of these things, you can buy a whole raft of different ones in different colors. And you can make some pretty colorful flies. And I think it's worth building a few different ones just for the heck of it and try them out. And that's it for this one. I called the Mickey is the Mickey fin. This is the Donald fin. And then the last
We
one
used
is
to
the
make
Scrooge
one
fin.
with the same colors, Dave, only the black was on top and this.
Yeah. And this is the Scrooge fin because it's really classy. It's got a gold body and a gold rib.
Good.
So just a little fun with colors and a basic pattern that you can do a lot more with than just tie the pattern that is in the book.
Just as an
There you go.
aside,
Beg pardon?
just as an aside, has anyone tried dyeing or bleaching fur, deer hair? Because I've got a whole bunch that is sort of a creamy color that I want to make some of it sort of pure white.
Well, certainly we're trying to bleach it.
Bleach will destroy the fibers.
Well,
It-
that's right.
It can, but that's how all the colored stuff is done. They actually have to bleach it with mild, a very mild solution of bleach first. And that's to take the oil off so that the dye will actually penetrate the hair.
So it's a
So most of these have been pre-bleached slightly. Now, see how they can't have used very much bleach because the brown still shows through on these patches.
That's right.
But and
Yeah, 'cause-
that's why you use bucktail rather than just deer hair. It's because the white-tailed deer has
Yep.
white hair.
That's right. Yeah.
I think that's why you look at all these. The colors take really well on the white. But just
Mhm.
plain deer hair, I don't know that you could bleach it enough to get rid of the brown color.
Well, most of the stuff that I have that I got from someone was sort of a creamy color. Some of it is bucktail, but a lot of it is just deer body hair. And it is a creamy color, but I want to get sort of pure white. And I don't want to make a huge batch of it, but just a few of the pieces. I'd like sort of a little more white if possible. So that's why, because
it's worth trying.
Yeah, because I had also read somewhere that bleach will damage it. So you're saying use a really diluted bleach solution?
I would try that real mild solution and don't leave it in really long.
Mm-hmm.
And then
Yeah.
rinse it
Just try it
very
on a small
well.
patch and see what happens. I think.
Rinse
Mm-hmm.
it very well underwater once you take it out of the bleach, because just taking it out of the bleach is not going to stop the process.
Yeah,
That's right.
Yeah, take it out and rinse it really good. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
And with the dyes, the trick with the dyes when you dye them is after you put them in the dye and you take them out of the dye, you put them in vinegar.
Yes, to
Vinegar
fix it.
And that fixes the dye.
Yeah.
So anyway, I thought this is intriguing. I think I'm going to have a go with this Aparanina this year.
Dave,
So I'll pack a few of these for us, Mohammed.
this is one I had a lot of luck with.
Yeah.
And as I said, we kept the darker color it imitates a smelt or a fingerling rainbow trout.
What's your topping? Because that's not deer hair, that's Guinea or something.
Yeah,
that's
crystal
bucktail.
flash on the top, but I have used black deer hair. I just had this one on the wall beside me, but the contrast in colors works really
So that's
well.
just black because it looks like it's got a black and white pattern on it.
Yeah. It looks like it has a shimmer on it. So it's
Yeah.
it
Well,
almost looks like
the top is crystal flash on this particular one.
Okay, that's what I was asking.
But
Yeah.
it's
Yeah,
got
you got a
that
little
pearl.
you got a little hackle on that too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think
pearl-
that makes I mean, the technique's the same. It's just you can, and that's one of the neat things is you can play with these patterns a little bit. And
I thought I caught more with the little hackle on the front for whatever, like you said, displaces water a little better. But that one there, I caught a lot of fish on. I just happened to have it on the wall here.
Yeah, And that you've used a standard salmon hook for that, right?
Yeah, it's just a black salmon hook.
Yeah.
We were catching spring run sea trout and salmon.
Yeah, that's in the East Coast, right?
Yeah, but
Yeah,
I
that's where
imagine that would catch fish anywheres. It's just
I'm sure
colorful.
they will. Yeah,
What
I've caught a
size
lot
hook
of
do you tie that on?
brook trout on it.
yeah.
Is that a size 6 or 4? What is it?
I think that's a 4. I like 2s and 4s for the spring when the water's heavy.
Okay. All right.
So Mohammed, I haven't heard back from Robin yet, but I would expect in the next little while we'll hear back from Robin about if they need a deposit and when.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Sounds good.
Yeah, Mohammed's going to join me up at Hanina this year.
Yeah, that'll be amazing.
It
Looking
should be
forward
fun.
to that.
It'll be fun. Okay, so this is Florin's turn.
Yeah, I'm gonna start tying because for a change, I'm doing the complicated fly. Okay. So what's complicated about this is trying to, you don't have to really, but it's kind of fun to at least try to follow the original instructions from Reg Denny, which is just separate a couple of fibers on either side of a teal flank feather for the tail, and then separate 3 fibers of grizzly hackle on either side of a hackle for the legs. Okay, so I'm gonna try to do both of these things in a just slightly simplified manner. Okay, so the fly that I end up with looks kind of like this, and I'm using black floss instead of this iron blue dun thing. First of all, I couldn't find any floss with that name, and the darkest gray that I have does not contrast well enough with the lightest gray that I have. So I decided I'm just going to use some of the gray that I have for the underbody, and then I'm going to use just plain black for the ribs, so that at least you get the contrast. The other flies I've tied, the contrast is almost non-existent. As you can see, I am using 2 different kinds of floss, but you can hardly tell I'm using 2 different kinds of floss. So that's been one of the challenges.
You need to spend more time in the sewing store in the embroidery floss department to select 4,000 colors of floss.
I did that too, and for some reason, again, I'm not getting. I have something that looks pretty dark, an embroidery floss, and when I use it, it doesn't give me satisfactory contrast either. So it's been a bit of a pain. And plus, floss for this pattern, floss has this nice property that it just lies very flat on the body. So when you use embroidery floss, you also get a slightly different texture. So, if you want to be crazy about that, you can. You don't have to. So you can absolutely use embroidery floss by all means. I'm a fan, and I have a box full of all kinds of colors. Anyway, hook for this is a 200 RTM Co, because it's the closest thing that comes to the original specification, and it's a ring eye hook. So the eye of the hook is straight continuation of the shank of the hook. The thread is just plain black, and I'm going to begin by taking the thread to the tail of the fly and trying to build a tiny little bump of thread at the point where I want my tail fibers to sit. And the reason is that if you've ever worked with any teal flank feather, it's a fairly finicky material to work with. Okay, so I've created my tiny little bump of thread there, and I'm just letting the thread hang. And This is the hard part. So I take my tail feather and I try to find one that's reasonably symmetric. Then I trim off the tip up to a point where I reach a length of tail, a length of fibers that's going to be a little bit longer than the tail I want to tie in. And now for the fun bit. I took a little piece of plastic tubing. This is, I don't know what the official diameter on this thing is, but I got this one from Lee Valley. It's kind of similar in diameter to what you get with a can of WD-40, that kind of stuff. And I think you can also tie tube flies on it. So here's what I do. I take the teal feather and I stick it down this tube. And this may or may not work very well the first time you try, but don't give up. Stick it in the tube, and by doing so, you're folding the feathers back, the fibers back. And then just let a little bit of that tip protrude from the end of the tube. Now get a hold of the feather and the tube and take a nice little fine bodkin and pluck 1, 2, don't sneeze when you do this, on one side, and 1, 2 on the other side. I believe I have now pulled the required fibers on either side. And while holding the feather in place, now I want to smooth these fibers back in the other direction. So I've got 2 fibers on one side and 2 on the other, and the other 2 are stuck together. So now what I can do is I can take this thing and I can place it on the hook where I want to tie in my tail. So I transfer the fibers to my left hand and attach this thing with 2 very light, loose wraps of thread, just so that the thing sits on the hook. Okay, the weight of the bobbin is all you want here. Okay, and then you gently pull on the stem of your feather, and notice that my thread is hanging in front of that bump, so that the bump is going to help. Whoops, I pulled a little too far. You can see I just created a mess. Okay, well, don't despair. I'm going to this is a delicate process. Okay, so back to where I was. I'm gonna try now to do it this way. Okay, so again, pull a little bit. You don't wanna pull too far, just to the point where you get these things in the position you want them to be in. When you're satisfied with the position you're in, do a couple more, this time properly tight wraps.
So Florin, are you actually catching it on the fibers or on the stem?
On the stem, and I'm leaving I went a little too far.
Okay.
Okay, these things are pretty long-tailed, so I'm aiming for a tail length comparable to hook shank. Okay, so now this is nice and secure. The next thing is kind of straightforward. You just take your rib, and as I said, I'm going to use the black for this application. It's also more easily visible on camera. So attach your rib all the way to where the base of the tail is. And again, here you have to be careful that you don't get into catching on the tail fibers, and just leave it sitting there. And then get the gray floss which is the lightest gray color that I have. The recipe says blue dun. Blue dun is one of the vaguest terms possible in fly tying. It's not very helpful when somebody says blue dun. It means a million different things to a million different people. So then I just take and I do a body here, fairly slenderish. I don't want to be too thick on this, although just going with one layer of floss is a little bit too little. Oops. And here you kind of try to maintain this, and this is where a rotary vise would make life a little bit simpler, although ribbing with a rotary vise presents its own separate challenges. So I'm doing a body, and I'm trying to be uniform about the shape of this body, but you know, results vary sometimes. And then come to the point where I want to do the thorax, at which point I do secure my floss, cut it off, and then I go and do my rib. Okay, so now I have the black floss. And this one, in fact, I would benefit from twisting a little bit so it doesn't lie overly flat. And secure. And now time for the front. So at the front, to build a thorax, I need two ingredients. First, I need a wing case. And the wing case comes from a walk in the park. You know the bird. It's our friendly Canada goose. Don't get too close. Don't try to pluck it off the bird. But the birds, at some point in late summer, are molting. They actually replace all their flight feathers. So if you're careful not to step on the other stuff, you can pick yourself a nice collection of feathers that will offer fly tying for a very, very long time. So just take a slip out of the feather and attach it with whatever preferred side facing up after you fold it. And then go and get, and I think in Victoria you can also, if you walk in the right parts of town, you can probably find the occasional tail feathers, because these guys are also molting their tail feathers.
Yeah, in the fall, I'll chase the guy around the park here at Cadbury Bay and get some feathers.
Yeah, disclaimer. Chasing after either peacocks or geese for the procurement of feathers, A, may get you in trouble with the animal lovers, and B, may
That's why you get the
trouble-
kids to do it.
These birds, yeah, right. Get the kids to do it. Sure, that's a very good one. I like that. Yeah. Well, these birds can be pretty aggressive, so I would refrain from going and plucking, you know, unless you do it, you know, at the appropriate time on a dark moonless night, that kind of thing. Anyway, so after you've attached this, take peacock and start building the thorax. So this takes a while again. I took two fibers.
Just get a
Sorry?
t-shirt with animal control on the back of it.
Yeah, you can. Sure. I think that's a better idea than some of the other ones, short of, yeah, you can use the same trick for plucking tails of deers, right? All right. So now we got a thorax, and then we come to the final exciting part of this process. Now, I don't really have the heart to take a whole hackle and trim everything off and just leave 3 little fibers on either side. So what I do is I take a piece of hackle, and this has been used already to tie a bunch of flies, okay? And again, cut off the tip of the hackle. So that's been trimmed off. Then separate a few fibers on either side. And then take your scissors and trim, if you can, actually I'm gonna put it here against the vise so it's visible. And then trim a little section of the feather in front of the fibers you separated out, okay? So what this does, it gives you the legs still sitting on the stem, and then you can attach them by taking the feather, and now you have to separate properly. That's why I cut that little segment. Well, it actually serves a dual purpose. On the one hand, I have behind me here, I have the legs, and then I have a little section of the stem that's got still little stubby bits of hackle along the stem. That's going to help secure this very well to the hook. So then all I do is I just place this at the front and attach it on top. This one has to be attached very securely because there's nothing else holding these legs in place. Then lift up the stem and trim above the hook. Okay? And this is what I end up with. And I have a few legs on one side and a few legs on the other side. And then I take the goose and fold it over the top while making sure that my legs are in the right place on either side. Then secure this with 2 or 3 nice tight wraps. Then fold this one more time to the back and put a few wraps in front. You've seen this trick many times before. This is to ensure that your goose quill here is properly secured. And then it's time for a little bit of a head. This may take a while. This is a large hook and I'm using 8/0 thread. And then go in and do a couple of whip finishes. And then cut the thread. And you start on the next fly. So there are your legs, there are your tails, and you can see the teal has a tendency to kind of stick to itself. So you can, for fun, you can do it like this. But if you want to be more efficient about the tying and not fuss with all this stuff, you just take a bundle of fibers for the tail. Again, just off either side of a teal flank. Then you take some grizzly hackle fibers and you can put like a little beard, or you do one wrap of hackle and then you just fold it down and you get your legs, right? Where you can use partridge if you like the looks of partridge. You want a barred look to the legs, right? So there are endless possibilities for substitution. And in fact, I will be doing, the plan for next week is to do a cousin of this pattern, which is called a baker's blue, which is significantly easier to tie. It has the same basic principles. And it has the added pleasure of letting you use some silver Dr. Blue floss. It was kind of funny because I read this pattern and then I was like, oh, silver Dr. Blue, boy, I hope I have this. And then I was doing some tying here with Northern Lights in Edmonton, and there were, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 of us on the call on Zoom, and I mentioned this, and 3 of the guys within less than 15 seconds each pulled out a spool of Silver Dr. Blue floss, right? And I was moaning about, oh, well, you know, this is a bit of an exotic color, blah, blah, blah. So I don't want to try the test with you because I guess this is more prevalent with saltwater patterns. So I'm sure the number is going to be even higher than what I got in Edmonton. But anyway, so this is my plan for next time. This is in the Flies for Alberta book, and it's meant to represent the same nymph, and it's a simplified version. I can do this pretty quickly as opposed to today's fly. But I just wanted to show you something that's a bit more complicated. So
There you go.
if you want a challenge, that's something to try. And I can also put up on the chat the little PDF with Reg Denny's original instructions for the fly.